So do or don't offer an explanation for each gap / is there an expiration date? So when it comes to deciding if you're going to explain all of them.
Yes, so I think it is important to offer an explanation for some of the most relevant gaps. And, the expiration date on gaps, like there is one, but it's not necessarily about how many years ago was this gap. It's sort of just like how far down is it on your resume? How
Right.
many different, more relevant experiences have you had since then? So, certainly, if you have a gap from the role that you were most recently in and you're actively interviewing, of course, you have to explain that one. You probably want to explain if there's one right before and maybe the one after that. But then beyond that, I would probably just leave it. And if someone asks, you can always get into it.
Right, right. Do or not explain in extreme detail about your gap. So, for example, if your gap is you were recovering from maybe an illness, like do you tell them like I was recovering from an illness, or is that too much detail? I mean, how much detail do you give? And like, I mean, obviously you want to explain the fact that, we were saying earlier, like we want to make sure they understand the story of why there was a gap.
For sure. So I think the most important thing is to be straight and to the point and unapologetic about it. The more you over explain or clearly have a sensitivity to the thing that you're talking about, the bigger of a deal it seems like from the person on the other end. So I think if you had a health issue and were going through recovery, that's actually not a lot of detail. That's just explaining what happened. It's pretty straight and to the point. So I think that's appropriate. Now, I don't think if your recovery took 5 months and there were a lot of twists and turns and then you had to move and be
Right.
transferred or who knows, right? That I don't think you need to get into. So, no, I wouldn't go into extreme detail. But yes, I would share the reason for the gap even if it is a more personal reason. And you should just use your judgment and discretion
Right.
on how much of something personal you want to share. So I've had people say to me, I took 3 months between these jobs because I was caring for a sick family member. That is a fine amount of detail. It never matters to me, the specifics of that situation. That's more than enough.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so the next question, I actually just got this the other day, and just to give some context, so on people's resumes, they usually list, their job title, the company, and the time that they're there. So do or don't use years instead of months if you were at a job for a short amount of time. So if you were at a job for 6 months, do you write, June 2019 to December, or do you just write 2019?
Lauren, what do you think about this one? I have a strong opinion.
So I really go back and forth, and part of it is I go back and forth depending on like how many gaps you have. So if you have a lot of gaps, then I kind of like the months. If you only have like one gap here or there, I think you can get away with the year. I guess I don't have like a strong opinion 100% of the time. It just really depends on how how your resume and your story is looking overall for me.
Yeah, so for me, especially because I'm still in a position where I'm reviewing tons and tons of resumes on a weekly basis, this is something that totally drives me crazy. I always want the months because if you're giving me years, especially for recent experiences, and especially if it looks like it's 1 year, then I basically know you're trying to not say something. And I think purposefully leaving out information for me is on par with lying. And I think integrity is such a big deal when you're hiring someone into your company. And so for me, leaving information off on purpose to mislead someone is a big integrity issue for me. So if I am interviewing someone who has just months on their or just years on their resume, of course I'll still call them in if they're qualified for the role. But you bet I'm going to
Yes,
ask for
you got some
those months.
questions.
And then if it seems like they were left off on purpose, for me, that's a character flag.
So one of the things I agree with that. And one of the things I do like, so for example, if someone had a lot of like short-term jobs, so let's say you had 3 short-term jobs in the same year and you're going to put the months. I'm also a big fan of people adding like a 1-sentence like overview to their resume. So like underneath your job title and company name saying something like, I worked here, I was a 3-month temp or something, or I was a temp while someone was on maternity leave. Because also the storyline of why you were somewhere for months versus, years might be very reasonable and also like really helpful for the context of that.
I totally agree. And by the way, if like somewhere on your resume you spent a 2-year period doing various temp jobs, I don't need the start and end months for every single one of those temp
Yeah.
jobs, just for full-time roles, right? So if you have various freelance roles from 2016 to 2019 and you want to list each company you worked for with the year, that's a totally different story. But for full-time experience, when you really sign up for a company, commit to working there, and it's a full-time role and that's everyone's expectations, I definitely want to know the exact month.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about what's the best way to explain a gap in your resume. And obviously, you know, since you are reviewing resumes all the time, any real examples of people who have done this super well, I think would be really helpful, because I do think this is definitely one of those things where it's more of an art than a science, and it depends on a lot of factors. So let's start with, what's the best way to explain a gap in your resume?
Sure. So let's talk about on the resume first. There are some gaps that can be very easily explained in just a few words in text that requires no other context. And if you have a reason like that, I would just put it on your resume in the line below your job title
Yep.
before the bullets where you describe what you do. So if you had to leave a job because your visa expired, or because the company got acquired, or because you relocated to a new state, these things are really black and white, so not a big deal, super helpful to know. And so I would say just put them right on your resume. And if something was a contract or a freelance role or temporary role, definitely always put that in the job title. Some people think that maybe that will be seen as less than, but that just alerts the person reading the resume right away that, like, yeah, this is 3 months long, but this is exactly why. So don't shy away from that.